Before my hair turned silver like frost on autumn leaves, before time left its marks on my skin, I was simply Eleanor, a girl just out of her teens, full of laughter that came easily and dreams that stretched far and wide. I lived with a heart full of hope, believing that the world was a place of endless possibilities. The dreams I had were as limitless as the skies before a summer storm, when the clouds gathered and you knew something big was coming. That version of me seems so far away now, like an old photograph hidden in a dusty album, fading with time. Now, to the one person who matters most, I am Mom. A title that has shaped me over the years. It is worn with love, yes, but also with a weight that sometimes feels heavy. And as time goes on, I fear it may be more of a burden than I ever imagined. I met Samuel when the world felt new and full of promise. I was 20, a young woman brimming with nervous energy and silent hopes for the future. He was different from the loud, boisterous boys I had known. He was quieter, more thoughtful. His calmness drew me in. There was something in his silence that spoke louder than any words could. Samuel was like poetry, gentle and deep, and when we talked, it felt like time slowed down. We spent hours talking late into the night, holding cups of steaming Earl Grey tea, sharing our thoughts, and in his gaze, there was an intensity that seemed to see right through my uncertainties. He didn't rush to fill the silences. He honored them, and in those silences, I found comfort. He proposed not with grand gestures or big declarations, but in the quiet intimacy of the rose garden behind his parents' house. It was a warm June evening, the kind where the air is thick with the sweet scent of blooming roses and honeysuckle. Above us, the stars didn't just seem distant. They felt like old friends, winking down at us as if they shared in the secret we hadn't yet spoken aloud. His voice, when he asked me to marry him, was calm and steady, a peaceful contrast to the frantic beating of my own heart. Saying yes felt like stepping into a river I had always meant to follow, carried by something stronger than my own hesitation. We built our life together, not on big dreams of wealth or success, but on the steady foundation of simple, everyday moments. It wasn't the fancy things that made our life special. It was the little rituals we shared, eating meals together at the worn kitchen table, the comforting smell of his favorite shepherd's pie filling the house, the way we said quiet prayers side by side before sleep, the walks we took hand in hand through the park in the early mornings as the city slowly woke around us, and perhaps most of all, it was the unspoken language that grew between us, the glance across a crowded room, the comforting hand on the shoulder, the shared silence that needed no words to communicate love, support, and understanding. Then came Michael. He didn't come into the world quietly, but with a loud, angry cry, protesting his sudden entrance into the world. The midwife placed him in my arms, tiny and trembling. His cries echoed in my ears, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of love and fear. But the moment my skin touched his, the noise stopped. The tiny, unfocused eyes blinked up at me, and his little hand, which had been flailing wildly, curled around my finger. That was the moment our bond began, a bond formed in silence, deep and strong. It was a connection I thought would never break, an unshakable bond between a mother and her child, or so I believed, wrapped in the fierce protective cocoon of new motherhood, where nothing seemed impossible. But time, as it always does, begins to change things. Love, relationships, and lives are not set in stone. People grow, they change, sometimes moving closer, sometimes slowly drifting apart. Needs shift, and unspoken hurts begin to accumulate like dust in the forgotten corners of a room. It's not always obvious at first, but over time it becomes clear. And sometimes one ordinary morning after decades have passed, you look at the people sitting around your breakfast table and realize with a jolt that although they are familiar, they have also become strangely distant. It's like looking at a reflection in troubled water. The image is there, but it's distorted, unreachable, And in that moment, you realize that something has shifted and you're not sure. When it happened, this is a story about a smile that belonged to my son, a smile that, once upon a time, held the power to light up my world, to chase away the darkness with its warmth. It was a smile that could make everything feel better, even on the hardest days. But years later, that same smile became the thing that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. It's a smile I thought I could always count on, but it turned into something more complicated, something I couldn't quite understand. This is the story of that smile, and how it changed everything. The early morning sun shone through my bedroom window, still soft and gentle, like it wasn't sure if it was ready to wake up. It poured through the pale curtains and spread long golden lines across the floor. The light highlighted the smooth wooden boards, showing the natural patterns in the wood and the tiny scuff marks that told the story of all the years we had spent here. The air smelled fresh, like the rain from the day before, and it was a nice change from the sweet, almost too strong, smell of the jasmine flowers floating up from the garden below. That smell made me think of Samuel, of the warm summer nights, and of a past that seemed both close and far away, like a dream I couldn't quite remember. I sat in my usual chair by the window, wrapped in my old wool shawl. The edges of the shawl were worn out, showing how many cold mornings and nights I had spent wrapped up in it, seeking comfort. The faded blue color reminded me of Samuel's favorite sweater. My fingers, stiff from arthritis, absent-mindedly traced the old familiar patterns woven into the fabric. Each loop and knot seemed to remind me of how much time had passed. Outside, the world was waking up. I could hear the cheerful sounds of sparrows and robins singing their songs and greeting the new day. Their melodies were like a soundtrack to my quiet mornings. Below, in the small garden that Samuel had cared for so lovingly, tiny drops of dew clung to the rose petals like little diamonds. Samuel had planted those roses shortly after we bought the house, carefully picking each one. Pink blush, crimson glory, peace. He knew them all by name even now, long after he had passed away. His presence still felt strong in the garden. Every petal, every bloom seemed like a little piece of him. I often found myself lost in thought, imagining him out there, kneeling among the thorns, his hands covered in dirt. I could almost see the familiar crinkles around his eyes as he looked up and caught me watching him from the window. Those memories were bittersweet, holding me tight while reminding me of the emptiness his absence left behind. Before my hair turned silver like frost on autumn leaves, before time left its marks on my skin, I was simply Eleanor, a girl just out of her teens, full of laughter that came easily and dreams that stretched far and wide. I lived with a heart full of hope, believing that the world was a place of endless possibilities. The dreams I had were as limitless as the skies before a summer storm, when the clouds gathered and you knew something big was coming. That version of me seems so far away now, like an old photograph hidden in a dusty album, fading with time. Now, to the one person who matters most, I am Mom. A title that has shaped me over the years. It is worn with love, yes, but also with a weight that sometimes feels heavy. And as time goes on, I fear it may be more of a burden than I ever imagined. I met Samuel when the world felt new and full of promise. I was 20, a young woman brimming with nervous energy and silent hopes for the future. He was different from the loud, boisterous boys I had known. He was quieter, more thoughtful. His calmness drew me in. There was something in his silence that spoke louder than any words could. Samuel was like poetry, gentle and deep, and when we talked, it felt like time slowed down. We spent hours talking late into the night, holding cups of steaming Earl Grey tea, sharing our thoughts, and in his gaze There was an intensity that seemed to see right through my uncertainties. He didn't rush to fill the silences. He honored them, and in those silences, I found comfort. He proposed not with grand gestures or big declarations, but in the quiet intimacy of the rose garden behind his parents' house. It was a warm June evening, the kind where the air is thick with the sweet scent of blooming roses and honeysuckle. Above us, the stars didn't just seem distant. They felt like old friends, winking down at us as if they shared in the secret we hadn't yet spoken aloud. His voice, when he asked me to marry him, was calm and steady, a peaceful contrast to the frantic beating of my own heart. Saying yes felt like stepping into a river I had always meant to follow, carried by something stronger than my own hesitation. We built our life together, not on big dreams of wealth or success, but on the steady foundation of simple, everyday moments. It wasn't the fancy things that made our life special. It was the little rituals we shared, eating meals together at the worn kitchen table, the comforting smell of his favorite shepherd's pie filling the house, the way we said quiet prayers side by side before sleep, the walks we took hand in hand through the park in the early mornings as the city slowly woke around us, and perhaps most of all, it was the unspoken language that grew between us, the glance across a crowded room, the comforting hand on the shoulder, the shared silence that needed no words to communicate love, support, and understanding. Then came Michael. He didn't come into the world quietly, but with a loud, angry cry, protesting his sudden entrance into the world. The midwife placed him in my arms, tiny and trembling. His cries echoed in my ears, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of love and fear. But the moment my skin touched his, the noise stopped. The tiny, unfocused eyes blinked up at me, and his little hand, which had been flailing wildly, curled around my finger. That was the moment our bond began, a bond formed in silence, deep and strong. It was a connection I thought would never break, an unshakable bond between a mother and her child, or so I believed, wrapped in the fierce protective cocoon of new motherhood, where nothing seemed impossible. I can't take it anymore, Mark, he said, confirming that he was talking to his oldest friend, probably on the phone, looking for comfort or support. It's constant. She's always here, always watching, always needing something. He sighed, the sound heavy and tired. Medications 3 times a day, reminders for appointments, making sure she eats right, doctor visits. It never ends. It's like she's become a huge responsibility, a burden. He paused, and the word hung in the air like a weight. God, I feel so guilty even saying it. She's my mom, but it's the truth. It's taking over everything. My breath caught in my throat. My heart didn't just stop. It felt like it was being squeezed tight by an icy hand. Burden. The word rang in my ears, loud and clear. Had I heard that right? Was this some kind of mistake? But the tiredness in his voice, the frustration, made it clear that it wasn't a mistake. This was real. This was how my son felt. There was a long pause, stretching the silence even more, and it felt like my heart was pounding louder with each passing second. Then I heard Mark's voice, soft and calm, but without much disagreement. I get it, man. It's tough. She's your mom, but maybe you need a break. You need some space. You've got your own life to live too. Michael sighed again, a heavier, deeper sigh, like he was carrying something he couldn't handle anymore. I just want my life back, he whispered, so quietly that it almost didn't sound real. My own life. Is that too much to ask? Something inside me cracked. It wasn't just a small break. It felt like everything I had believed in shattered. Like glass dropped on cold stone, it broke into pieces. The image of the devoted son I had always imagined, of the family we had, crumbled into nothing. I don't remember making a decision, but suddenly I was backing away from the door. My legs felt weak and unsteady, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I somehow found my way down the dark hallway, barely able to see, and I stumbled back to my room. where I closed the door behind me. I couldn't stop the tears from coming, even though I had tried so hard to hold them back. The weight of what I had just heard was too much. I sank down on the bed, my hands shaking as I touched the familiar softness of the mattress. My shawl fell from my shoulders, unnoticed. Tears, hot and burning, finally came, running down my face in the dark. My son, the boy I had raised with so much love, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the boy I had always promised to protect, had spoken words that tore my heart apart. Words I was never meant to hear. My own son sees me as a burden. He wants his life back, away from me. I couldn't stop the thoughts from spinning around in my head, over and over, making everything feel tighter and tighter inside. The warm milk was forgotten, and sleep felt impossible. The night stretched on forever, filled with pain, sadness, and confusion. Sleep had become a distant idea, something I couldn't reach, no matter how hard I tried. The hours between hearing Michael's painful words and the first light of dawn felt like the longest hours of my life. I didn't lie down at all. Instead, I sat up straight on the edge of my bed, with the shawl Samuel had given me lying forgotten on the floor. I stared at the familiar patterns on the wallpaper in my bedroom, patterns I had chosen years ago with Samuel, back when life felt so much different. My thoughts were spinning around slowly, like a bird with broken wings that couldn't fly, or a ceiling fan slowly coming to a stop. Images kept flickering in my mind. Michael as a baby, with his wide, gummy smile. Michael as a proud graduate, smiling and standing beside me with his arm around my shoulders. Michael just yesterday, bringing me a glass of water with a tired, practiced smile. But now, each memory felt different. They were mixed with the painful echo of his words from the night before. Burden. I want my life back. I reached over to pick up a decorative pillow from the bed. It was something I had made myself many years ago, just after Samuel had passed away. My fingers traced the detailed floral patterns stitched into the fabric. The bright pink and sunny yellow threads I had carefully chosen were meant to bring some cheer into the quiet house. Back then, the colors had been bright and full of life. But now, in the soft light before dawn, they looked faded, almost apologetic, as if the pillow itself felt sorry for the way things had changed. Some of the threads were even worn thin. I realized, with a sad clarity, that time fades everything: fabric, photographs, vibrant memories, and even the strong bond between a mother and her child. Love hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It had lost its warmth, its brightness, worn down by unspoken needs and quiet resentments. By the time I heard the first birds singing in the morning, a decision had formed in my mind. It was still wrapped in sadness and confusion, but it was there, clear and firm in my heart. This wasn't a decision born from anger or a need to get back at Michael. Anger would have been easier. I could have shouted, argued, slammed doors, or said hurtful things. That might have felt good for a moment, but it wouldn't have changed anything. What I felt instead was much deeper and much harder to carry. It was a deep, aching sadness that settled in my chest, mixed with disappointment, not just in Michael, but also in myself. Had I missed the signs? Had I asked too much from him? Had I been leaning on him too heavily? The sadness felt permanent, like it would never leave. I made up my mind. I would go. It wouldn't be a dramatic exit. I wouldn't scream or leave angry notes behind. That wasn't me. And really, what good would it do? Leaving with anger wouldn't erase the pain of what I had heard, and it wouldn't fix the distance that had opened between us. No, I would leave quietly, without making a scene. It would be a soft departure, like slipping away unnoticed. My purpose wasn't to punish Michael. It was to set him free, to give him the space he seemed to need, the life he wanted back. And I had to do this for myself too. I needed to step outside the life I had known, outside of this role of mom, the dependent, aging woman. I needed to find out if there was still an Eleanor left under all these years and expectations. I needed to see who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationship to Michael, by this house, or by the ghost of Samuel. I would leave. Not just the house, which held so many memories, both happy and painful, but also the life of quiet dependency I had built. I needed to get away, to look at things from a distance. I needed to breathe, to clear my mind. I didn't know how long I would be gone. I didn't know where I would go. I had no plan at all. But the need to leave felt urgent. It felt like I had no choice, but before I could go, I had to prepare. I had to do it carefully, without making noise. I needed to get everything ready before the sun rose, before Michael came upstairs with his glass of water and his carefully rehearsed smile. The day seemed to stretch on forever. Each hour moving so slowly, it felt like time itself was slowing down. I moved through the house quietly, almost like a ghost, my actions deliberate and careful, guided by a calm decision I had made in the quiet hours before the sun rose. After a tense breakfast with Michael, where we barely spoke, he left for work. He gave me his usual quick kiss on the cheek, not looking me in the eyes, and the sound of the front door closing behind him seemed loud in the sudden silence. That silence felt like an opportunity for me. I didn't waste time crying or second-guessing myself. My decision was now clear, and I knew it had to happen. I first went to the bathroom and took the medications I needed. The pills for my blood pressure, the ones for my aching joints, and the inhaler that I didn't use often, but always kept nearby. I carefully counted enough to last for a week or two, maybe even longer. Then I gathered my ID, my driver's license, though I hadn't driven in years, my Medicare card, and a faded photo of Samuel and a younger Michael tucked into my wallet. I had kept this photo for so long, but it felt strange to hold it now, like I was holding a piece of a life that no longer existed. From a hidden tin box under my bed, where I kept some emergency cash, I took out a small amount. Not much, just enough for a bus ticket, a cheap motel, and some simple food. It wasn't enough to make anyone notice, but it would be enough for me to survive for a while. I went to my closet and chose some clothes for my journey, a pair of practical slacks, a comfortable blouse, undergarments, and another warm cardigan. Nothing fancy, nothing that held too much meaning, except maybe the familiarity of them. I carefully folded the clothes, along with my medications and wallet, and packed them into an old worn leather handbag. It had been a gift from Samuel almost 20 years ago, and though the leather was soft and slightly creased, the brass clasp had tarnished over time. It felt strange, but almost poetic, to carry something that had belonged to him with me. It felt like he was with me as I stepped into this uncertain path. I moved through the house one last time, not letting myself get lost in the memories that clung to every room. I couldn't let myself linger at the armchair where I used to sit and read, or in the kitchen where Samuel and I had danced clumsily one anniversary. I couldn't even stop at the hallway where we had marked Michael's height on the doorframe, year after year. Acknowledging these memories now felt like I would be betraying my decision to leave. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have any specific place in mind, no relative or town calling to me. My only goal was to find some space, to become anonymous. I needed to be somewhere where I wasn't known as Michael's mom, where I wouldn't be weighed down by expectations. Michael needed space to live his own life, free from the burden I had become. And I needed to find out if there was still something of me left, beyond the roles I had played for so many years. Was there still an Eleanor under all the layers of time and responsibilities? As the evening came, the sky turned a deep purple and grey, hinting at more rain. The air felt heavy. Before leaving, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where so many family meals had been shared. I took a piece of plain paper from the notepad next to the phone, my hand shaking as I wrote. The pen pressed gently into the paper as I chose my words carefully, wanting to express love without anger, finality without resentment. Michael, I love you more than words can express. Please don't worry about me. I need some time. I hope one day you'll understand my decision. Mum. My signature felt unsteady, like my hand was unsure, but my heart was resolute. I folded the note and placed it on the table, where I knew he would see it when he came home. I took a deep breath and picked up my handbag. Its weight, though small, brought me some comfort. I slipped my old house key into my pocket, the one Samuel had given me long ago, kept separate from the other keys. It was a habit I couldn't break, or maybe it was something I still held on to. Then I opened the back door that led to the garden and stepped out into the cool night air. It was a sharp contrast to the warmth of the house, the chill biting at my skin as I walked away. The city felt quieter that night, almost like it was holding its breath. The streetlights cast long shadows on the wet pavement, and I wrapped my shawl tighter around me. I didn't walk toward the familiar streets I knew so well. I walked away, toward the main road, where the distant lights of the bus station blinked. The sound of my shoes tapping on the wet pavement kept time with my heartbeat. Every step took me farther from everything I had known. My heart felt both heavy with fear and strangely lighter with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in a long time. The fear was real, sharp and immediate, but under it, there was something else, a flicker of courage. Perhaps it was freedom, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The smell of jasmine, carried by the rain, lingered in the air, reminding me of the life I had left behind. The days following my departure blurred into a monotonous rhythm of movement and anonymity. I became adept at navigating the impersonal landscape of budget travel, Greyhound buses sighing through the night, transferring at brightly lit, desolate stations in the small hours, checking into a series of cheap, nondescript motels on the outskirts of unfamiliar towns. Each room was a variation on a theme: worn floral bedspreads, flickering fluorescent lights in the bathroom, the faint smell of stale cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains, the distant rumble of highway traffic, a constant lullaby. I never stayed anywhere longer than a night or two, driven by a restless need to keep moving, to avoid leaving any discernible trail. I paid in cash, used no credit cards, spoke only when necessary, ordering coffee, buying a bus ticket, checking in or out. I became a ghost in my own life, deliberately erasing myself. With each mile put between myself and home, the initial sharp ache of Michael's words, the raw wound of betrayal, began to dull slightly. It didn't disappear, but it scabbed over, replaced by a quieter, more profound sense of resolve. This journey wasn't just about escaping a painful situation. It was becoming a pilgrimage of sorts, a quest to rediscover the Eleanor who existed independently of her roles as wife and mother. One particularly warm afternoon, weeks into my self-imposed exile, I found myself in a quiet, sunny-dappled park in a town whose name I barely registered. I sank onto a slightly rusted green metal bench beneath the sprawling branches of a majestic old oak tree. Its leaves rustled gently in the breeze, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the grass. In the distance, children's laughter rang out, clear and bright as tiny bells, as they chased each other around a playground structure. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun soak into my face, the sounds of the park washing over me, the laughter, the birdsong, the distant hum of the city. And in that moment of unexpected peace, a memory surfaced, sudden and clear. An old, sturdy cardboard box stored away in the attic back home. It was filled with Samuel's things, items I hadn't had the heart to sort through properly after his death: papers, old photographs and letters. Letters he had kept tied with ribbon. Letters I had never read. Why? Why had I sealed that part of him away so completely? Grief, perhaps. The pain was too raw then. Or maybe a subconscious reluctance to disturb the image I held of him. The quiet, steady man I thought I knew so well. A sharp pang of guilt, swift and unexpected, pierced through my quiet resolve. What if there were answers in that box? Insights into the man he was, clues to the shadows I now suspected had lingered beneath his calm surface. Could his past hold the key to understanding Michael's present? The thought took root, burrowing into my mind. displacing the aimless drifting of the past weeks with a new, urgent sense of purpose. I needed to see those letters. I needed to know. The decision to return, even temporarily, felt fraught with risk. What if Michael was home? What if a neighbor saw me? But the need to access that box outweighed the fear. I bought a bus ticket back, the journey feeling different this time, charged with nervous anticipation rather than weary escape. I arrived in my home city late the following morning. I spent hours in a coffee shop several blocks away, nursing a single cup of tea, watching the clock, waiting for the familiar time Michael usually left for his downtown office. My heart hammered against my ribs as I finally approached the house, pulling the scarf I'd bought tightly around my head and keeping my gaze lowered. The street seemed quiet, blessedly empty. The house stood silent and unchanged, the rose bushes needing pruning, the paint on the porch railing peeling slightly. It looked lonely. Using the old spare key, the one Samuel had insisted I keep separate, just in case, I let myself in through the back door, my breath held tight in my chest. The silence inside was heavy, thick with unspoken questions and the lingering scent of Michael's morning coffee. Moving quickly, purposefully, ignoring the pull of familiar objects, I went straight upstairs and pulled down the folding ladder to the attic. The air up there was thick with dust motes, dancing in the single beam of light from the small window. The scent was of old paper, decaying fabric, and forgotten memories. After a few minutes of searching amongst stacked boxes and covered furniture, my fingers brushed against the familiar rough texture of the cardboard box I sought. Tucked away behind an old rocking horse, my hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst faded photographs and miscellaneous papers, were several bundles of letters, tied neatly with faded blue ribbon. Some were clearly addressed to me, in Samuel's familiar, slightly slanted script. Others, intriguingly, were addressed to Michael, written over the years, but perhaps never given. And then, tucked beneath these, was a thicker, slightly heavier envelope, sealed, with no name on the front at all. With a deep breath, I untied the ribbon on the bundle addressed to Michael first, hoping for insight. But it was the unaddressed envelope that truly drew my attention. Carefully, my fingers clumsy with anticipation, I broke the brittle wax seal. Inside was not one letter, but several pages, folded together, written in Samuel's hand. The ink was faded, but the words were starkly legible. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I began to read. If you are reading this, Eleanor, or perhaps Michael, it means things have gone terribly wrong, and I haven't been able to shield you as I intended. He wrote not of poetry or roses, but of debts, significant debts, accrued through business ventures that had soured, investments that had failed spectacularly. He wrote of misjudgments, of misplaced trust in associates who turned out to be less than reputable. He wrote of escalating pressure, of hushed phone calls late at night, of shadowy figures who came knocking, their demands becoming increasingly menacing. He wrote of fear, a raw, corrosive fear he had hidden behind his quiet smile and calm demeanor. Fear for his reputation, fear for our security, but overwhelmingly, fear for Michael's future. And then, the line that made the blood run cold in my veins. I've made arrangements, taken steps. I will protect Michael, shield him from the fallout of my mistakes, no matter the cost. Even if it means sacrificing everything, he must never carry this burden. Sacrificing everything. The words echoed Michael's own desperate plea from the other night. I just want my life back. Suddenly, the weariness in my son's eyes, the constant stress etched onto his face, the overheard conversation about being burdened, it all snapped into a horrifying new focus. It wasn't me who was the primary burden. It was something far older, far more dangerous. A legacy of debt and fear left behind by his father, a secret Samuel had died trying to conceal, and a burden Michael had somehow, impossibly, inherited. Everything made a strange, terrible kind of sense. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. The letters Samuel had left me were in my hands, the paper thin and fragile against my trembling fingers. The weight of what I now knew was overwhelming, far heavier than the worn leather handbag I had slung over my shoulder. With each step I took away from the attic and the silent house, the weight of the knowledge seemed to grow. The need for privacy and distance that had driven me before evaporated. What replaced it was an urgent desire to protect, to go back, not only for myself, but for Michael. I realized now that his exhaustion wasn't because of me. He wasn't tired from caring for me. He was buried under the heavy weight of his father's secrets. My return wasn't planned out. There was no strategy, no carefully thought-out plan. I just knew that I had to go back. Later that afternoon, I walked back up the path to the house. I didn't hesitate. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare key that Samuel had insisted I keep, and unlocked the door. I stepped inside, my heart racing as I entered the place I had left behind. When Michael saw me standing there in the hallway, his face was filled with shock. He had been sitting at the kitchen table, looking down at a pile of mail with a half-eaten sandwich beside him. The sound of the door unlocking startled him, and his head snapped up, wide-eyed. His face went through a rapid series of emotions, first shock, then disbelief, followed by a flicker of relief, and then, suddenly, guilt. His eyes darted everywhere but to my face, shifting from the floor to the walls, unable to meet my gaze. His hands, which had been resting on the table, tightened into fists, his knuckles going white. "Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with confusion and anxiety. You're back. Where were you? I was so worried." The note. I slowly walked toward the kitchen, placing my handbag and Samuel's letters carefully on the counter. I sat down opposite Michael, moving slowly, purposefully, trying to calm the tension between us. I could feel the fear and hurt I'd been carrying for so long beginning to fade, replaced by a deep sympathy for the man who sat across from me, my son, who seemed lost and afraid. "You don't need to talk about me leaving right now, Michael," I said softly, more calmly than I had expected. I locked eyes with him, holding his gaze until he slowly lifted his head to look at me. I think I already know. Not everything, but enough." His face went even paler than it already was, and I saw it. The fear, the overwhelming sadness. He looked smaller than he ever had before, like a child facing something much bigger than he could handle. "No, you don't, Mom," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, breaking in a way I hadn't heard before. "You couldn't possibly understand. I never wanted to burden you. Not with this, not with everything that's been happening." Michael ran a hand through his already messy hair, a habit I knew well from his younger years. His eyes, once full of confidence, now looked tired and broken. Lines that hadn't been there before were deepening around his eyes, showing the weight of stress that had built up over time. "It's all spiraled out of control," he whispered, his voice almost a sob. After he died, I found things I didn't understand. Debts. I didn't know how bad it was. I thought I could fix it, protect his memory, protect you. But I was wrong. I didn't realize how deep it went, or who these people were. I sat there, listening to Michael's broken words, and it all started to make sense. The pieces of the puzzle began to click together. The debts, the vague threats he had mentioned, the fear in his voice. It wasn't just about money. It was about the immense burden Michael had been carrying, and the loneliness that came with it. I realized he had been trying to protect me from this nightmare, but in doing so, he had shut me out. His attempts to shield me only built a wall between us, a wall that had kept me from understanding the full picture. With a shaking hand, I reached across the counter and gently touched the letters I had found. "Your father, Samuel. He left these, Michael," I said quietly, my voice unsteady. "I found them today. He wrote about the debts, about business deals that went wrong. He was trying to protect you, even if it meant giving up everything. I let the words sink in, my own eyes filling with tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry before. Is there more, Michael? Something about Dad you haven't told me? He didn't speak right away. His face was a mixture of guilt, fear, and sadness, like a man who had been carrying a heavy weight alone for too long. Finally, he exhaled deeply, as if releasing years of pent-up emotion. I didn't want to tell you, he whispered, the words full of shame. I didn't want you to know how much I'd failed, how I got caught up in his mess, how I couldn't protect you the way he wanted. His voice trembled as he finally met my eyes, and I saw the tears in his. But, yes, Mom, there's more, so much more. It didn't end with Dad. It started before I even understood, but after he was gone, they came after me. I didn't know who they were. I got involved deeper than I ever thought I would. Tears flooded my eyes. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even angry at Michael. The tears that fell were full of sorrow and pain. Sorrow for everything Michael had gone through alone, for the burden he had inherited from his father, and for the pain I had missed, the signs I hadn't seen. My son, the boy I had loved and protected, had been forced to carry a burden that was never his to bear, and in his desperation to protect me, he had kept me in the dark, keeping the distance between us wider than ever. This was the cost of his love, his silent sacrifice, a sacrifice that almost destroyed us both. I'm so sorry, Michael, I whispered, my voice breaking. I should have seen it. I should have been there for you. Michael's shoulders sagged, and he let out a long, deep sigh, as though the weight of everything had finally hit him. The walls he had built around himself crumbled, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the boy I had raised, lost, frightened, but finally willing to let go of his burdens. I reached out and placed my hand on his. We'll figure this out, Michael, I said, my voice steady again, though the sadness still lingered. You're not alone in this anymore. We'll face it together, no matter what. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the connection between us again. It was fragile, but it was there, and that was all that mattered. As Michael continued talking, his words coming out slowly at first, then more quickly, as if a flood of emotions had finally been released, I started to understand just how deep the situation had become. It was not just about some debts Samuel had left behind. It was far more serious and much more frightening. The ground beneath me felt as if it was no longer stable, as if it was crumbling, revealing a deep and dark hole that I had no idea existed beneath the life I had lived with my family. All those years, I had thought we were just dealing with ordinary struggles, money problems, stress, difficult times. But this was something much darker, something I had never expected. The debts Samuel had left behind weren't just simple amounts owed to banks or other usual lenders. Samuel, desperate to fix failing businesses and provide for us, had apparently gotten involved with people who weren't just businessmen. These people were dangerous. Samuel had borrowed money from sources that were not only unscrupulous, but also illegal. These were people involved in serious crimes, activities that Michael had only vaguely understood at first, but clearly feared. He spoke of money laundering, extortion, and possibly even worse things. These weren't just ordinary creditors demanding money. These were dangerous people, part of an organized network. And now, this network was after Michael. Michael's voice was low and heavy as he spoke. I could hear the tension, the fear, in every word. He described how, after Samuel's sudden death, these shadowy figures saw an opportunity. They didn't just forgive the debts or let them go. They came after Michael, pretending at first to just want to settle his father's business, but quickly showing their true intentions. They started to put pressure on him, first softly, then more aggressively, making threats not only against him, but against me, his mother. They wanted him to comply, to keep quiet, and to help them with their illegal dealings. Michael was trapped in a situation he couldn't control. They started small, Michael said, his voice shaky and full of regret. He was staring at his hands, clenched tightly in his lap. They said I could work off Dad's debt, help them with a few things, just use my business contacts. They told me to look the other way, to turn a blind eye to what they were doing. I didn't know what else to do, Mom. I was terrified. I thought I could handle it, pay them off, fix everything. But it doesn't work like that. Once they get you in, you can't get out. They own a piece of you, and they know everything about you. They watch you. They know what you do. As I listened, I began to feel a cold shiver running down my spine. This wasn't just a financial problem anymore. This was criminal involvement, a web that Samuel had unknowingly set in motion years ago, a web that had now trapped Michael. The more he spoke, the more everything started to make sense, but at the same time, the more terrifying it became. The conversation Michael had with his friend Mark, which I had overheard, suddenly took on a whole new meaning. Michael wasn't just worn out from taking care of me. He was worn out from living in constant fear, from trying to handle a problem he couldn't escape. His exhaustion wasn't just from caregiving. It was from the weight of a hidden, dangerous situation he couldn't control. Michael's face twisted with worry as he continued. His voice was almost a whisper now, barely audible, as if he was afraid to say too much out loud. I don't know who to trust anymore, Mom. I can't trust anyone. I don't know who's connected to them, who might be watching me. Everything feels like a lie. I feel like I'm walking through a minefield, not knowing where the next danger is coming from. I looked at him, my son, this young man who still, in so many ways, felt like my child. I could see the fear in his eyes, but underneath it, there was something else, something that reminded me of the boy I had raised, and for the first time, I felt a mixture of love and terror, a fierce need to protect him and a deep sadness that I hadn't known about any of this. All those years I had spent trying to shield him from the world, trying to keep him safe, had been in vain. The real dangers had already infiltrated our lives, planted by Samuel, the man we both loved and had lost. Samuel had promised to protect Michael, to keep him safe from harm. But in doing so, he had created this nightmare. By trying to protect Michael from the truth, by keeping the secrets about the debts and the dangerous people he was dealing with, Samuel had left Michael vulnerable. He had left him to face the consequences alone. As Michael finished explaining, I realized that the pain I had felt earlier, the hurt over being called a burden, seemed small and insignificant compared to the real problem Michael was facing. His struggles, the ones he had kept hidden for so long, were far worse than anything I had ever imagined. "What do we do now, Michael?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling but steady. The words felt heavy, hanging in the air between us, full of the uncertainty of the situation. Michael finally looked up at me. His eyes were full of fear, but there was also a glimmer of something else, something that felt like determination. He had confessed his secret to me, and somehow that seemed to give him a new sense of strength. "We have to get out," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "We have to cut all ties with these people, disappear. I've been trying to figure out how to do it. I've looked into some options, but it's hard. Every move I make feels like it's being watched. I'm afraid it might already be too late." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his tightly clenched fist. His skin was cold, and I could feel the tension in his muscles. "No," I said firmly, my voice quiet but unwavering. "It's not too late. We'll figure this out. You're not alone in this anymore." For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, something changed between us. A connection that had been buried under fear and secrecy started to emerge again, fragile but real. We had both been alone with our pain for too long. Now, together, we would face the challenges ahead. Whatever it took, we would get through it. The atmosphere in our home shifted completely in the days after I learned the truth. The quiet that had always been there, filled with unspoken words and hidden resentment, was replaced by whispered conversations, long talks that often stretched into the late hours of the night. We went over every detail in Samuel's letters, Michael's knowledge of what his father had been involved in, and the hidden secrets that Samuel had left behind. We were no longer just a mother and her son, awkwardly adjusting to the changing roles in our lives. Now, we were partners, working together to face something much bigger than ourselves, a dark, dangerous force that we could hardly comprehend. Creating a plan to fix the situation felt impossible. It was like trying to find our way through a maze while blindfolded. Cutting ties with a criminal network wasn't like closing a bank account or canceling a credit card. It was dangerous, and we had no idea what kind of risks we would face. Going to the police seemed like the right choice at first, but Michael was terrified. He believed that the criminal group had people everywhere, even people who could listen to our phone calls. If we went to the police, he feared that the group would retaliate violently before we could get any kind of protection. On top of that, Michael had been involved in their illegal dealings, though he had been forced to do so. This made everything more complicated. Our plan had to be one of careful escape and complete disappearance. We needed to find a way to protect ourselves, but also gather enough information to fight back. The plan wasn't perfect. It wasn't even safe, but it was the only way we could see that might allow us to regain control of Michael's life and make sure that I would be safe too. The first thing we had to do was gather information. Michael started by carefully looking through Samuel's papers and using clues that came from his own interactions with the dangerous people Samuel had dealt with. Michael spent hours using encrypted computers to search for names, companies, anything that could help us understand who these people were and what they could do. He knew we had to be careful, not to raise suspicion while searching for answers. My role in this was unexpected, but crucial. I remembered things Samuel had said years ago, names of people, comments about business trips, details I had thought were not important at the time. All these small fragments of memory turned out to be pieces of a much larger puzzle. While Michael worked quietly in the background, I did my part by maintaining a normal routine at home. I answered the phone as usual, went about my daily tasks, and made sure nothing looked unusual to the outside world. We were always aware that someone could be watching us, so we had to act like everything was normal. Every phone call, every movement we made had to be done cautiously. Despite this constant fear of being watched, something remarkable began to happen. Michael, who had shut himself off from me for so long, started to open up again. He began to talk to me, not just about the danger, but about his own fears and regrets. He told me about the enormous pressure he had been under for so many years, and I listened carefully, without judgment. I didn't offer easy answers or false hope. Instead, I gave him quiet support and my full attention. It was in those moments that we began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't just about being mother and son anymore. We had become partners, bound together not just by blood, but by the shared struggle to survive. We understood that the situation wasn't just about escaping a dangerous group anymore. It was about taking our lives back from the shadows that had threatened to consume us. Little by little, we started to make progress. We chipped away at the control the criminal network had over us. Michael began to redirect money, creating false trails to confuse the people who were watching him. He carefully gathered evidence, encrypted files, recordings of threats made in hushed voices that could be used as leverage. Each small victory felt enormous, a victory over the dark forces that had been pulling the strings for so long. But with every victory came fear. Every moment was filled with tension. There were times when a car would sit on our street for too long, or when the phone would ring and no one would say anything. Every little sign felt like a warning. A remark from a business associate could mean something more than just words. These moments were terrifying, but they made us stronger. With each hurdle we overcame, we became more determined. We were no longer just a mother and son. We had become a team, united by a dangerous secret and a shared hope for freedom. The sense of isolation and fear that we both felt after the truth came out was like a weight that we couldn't shake off. The air around us had changed. It wasn't just about dealing with the dangerous people in the criminal network anymore. It was about trying to figure out how we had arrived here in the first place. Samuel's secrets had not only put us in danger, they had altered the course of our lives. What started as a quiet betrayal by someone we loved had now grown into a full-blown crisis. Each time we spoke about the situation, the tension in the room grew thicker. The silence that had once been filled with memories of Samuel's quiet presence was now replaced by urgent discussions about how we could fight back against the network he had unknowingly created. It was no longer just about getting out of a dangerous situation. It was about reclaiming everything we had lost in the process. Michael and I were no longer just family members trying to adjust to new circumstances. We had become allies in a fight for survival. We were strategists now, planning each step carefully to ensure that we could escape without being tracked. The entire process was terrifying, and every decision we made carried enormous consequences. Michael's first instinct was to protect me, and he still hadn't fully trusted anyone other than me. The sense of loyalty he felt for me was deep, but it also created barriers. He hadn't wanted to burden me with the knowledge of what was really going on. For years he had kept the truth hidden, assuming that he could fix it all on his own. The realization that I had been left in the dark for so long hit me like a ton of bricks. But as I listened to him explain everything, it became clear that his secrecy wasn't born from neglect or indifference. It was born from love, fear, and a sense of responsibility he couldn't handle. Our plan wasn't perfect. There was no perfect plan in a situation like this. The stakes were too high, and the risks were too great. Months passed, and with them, the constant fear and secretive planning slowly faded away. What replaced it was a fragile calm, one we had fought hard to find. Our lives had not returned to the way they were before Samuel died, nor even to how they were before I briefly left. Too much had happened, and too many truths had been revealed. But even though we couldn't go back, a new kind of routine began to form, one built on honesty and careful hope. Escaping from the criminal network was far from easy. It wasn't a clean break. We had to take calculated risks to protect ourselves. Michael had gathered valuable information over time, and we used it carefully. We anonymously shared the damaging details he had learned with a rival group within the organization. This caused enough confusion and suspicion within their ranks, giving us a chance to slip away during the chaos that followed. But that wasn't the only change we made. We had to leave everything behind, physically and emotionally. We sold the house where we had so many painful memories and moved to a completely different state. Our old life, our old connections, had to be left behind, and we cut ties with almost everyone we knew. It was a painful process, and even though we had managed to escape, the scars from that time would never fully disappear. The shadows of our past lingered, a constant reminder of the danger we had narrowly escaped. We knew we could never take our safety for granted again. But what changed most deeply within us wasn't just the external circumstances. It was how we related to each other. Our relationship, once strained by unspoken burdens and painful misunderstandings, began to heal. The ordeal we had gone through had stripped away all the layers of pretending, the years of emotional distance. We had been forced to rely on each other in ways we never had before, to trust each other completely, especially when everything else in our lives felt uncertain. Our conversations became more open, more honest. We didn't hide our feelings anymore. We shared our fears, our hopes, and the weight of everything we had endured. Michael no longer wore the mask of duty, the one that had made him seem distant and tired all the time. And I no longer felt like an outsider in my own life, or like a burden that needed constant care. We had become closer than we had ever been before. We began rebuilding our lives on a much stronger foundation. This new foundation was not built on secrets or lies, but on shared experiences and mutual respect. Yes, there were still difficult conversations to have. We had to talk about the past and the pain that came with it. Michael had to admit the guilt he felt for the things he had said, especially during that terrible conversation I had overheard. I had to express my hurt too, the pain I felt from thinking that I was nothing but a burden to him. We also shared our grief over Samuel, how his hidden struggles and the legacy he left behind had affected us both. But the most important thing we did was to forgive each other. Michael apologized for the hurtful words he had said, explaining how fear and pressure had made him act out of desperation, and I forgave him, understanding the incredible stress he had been under. He, in turn, forgave me for leaving, for the hurt that had driven me to walk away, and perhaps the hardest part of all was forgiving Samuel. We acknowledged that he had loved us, but that his fear had led him to make mistakes. In forgiving him, we found a sense of unexpected peace. One evening, I sat on the small balcony of our new apartment, looking out over the city below. The sun had just set, and the city lights began to twinkle. I could see the first stars of the night appear, one by one, in the dark sky. I felt a sense of peace that I had not thought possible just months before. The journey we had been on had been full of pain, fear, and betrayal, but it had also taught us many hard lessons. It had stripped away the illusions we had once held about our lives, and in doing so, it gave us clarity. I looked over at Michael, who was sitting next to me, reading quietly. The stress that had once marked his face was gone. Instead, there was a calm, quiet contentment. He looked up at me, and our eyes met. He smiled, not the forced, tired smile he used to wear, but a real smile, one filled with warmth and understanding. In that moment, I realized something that I had never fully understood before. The greatest mysteries of life aren't always the things we see on the outside. Sometimes, the most important mysteries are the ones inside us, in our own hearts, and in the hearts of the people we love. We had faced a storm. We had navigated through the darkness, and now we were finally emerging into the calm, together. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid of the future. It didn't feel like something to survive or endure anymore. For the first time, it felt like something we could embrace, cautiously, but with hope. This journey had been a difficult one. We had been through so much, but in the end, it had brought us closer. The pain, the fear, the tears, it all had a purpose. It helped us see what truly mattered. And now, as I sat with Michael, watching the world around us, I knew that the worst was behind us. We were free from the shadow of Samuel's secrets and free from the danger that had haunted us for so long. We had learned that true strength comes from facing the hardest challenges together. It's not about fighting alone. It's about having someone by your side who you can trust completely. We had learned to trust each other again, to rely on each other, and in doing so, we had rebuilt something precious, a bond that was stronger than anything we had before. For the first time in months, I felt that we were no longer just surviving. We were living, and that feeling of truly living was the most profound and unexpected gift we had received.